Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, The Story Ain't Over. So those of you who have been watching my channel for a very long time now, you know that I am South Asian, I am Tamil. My parents were born and raised in Sri Lanka and came to Canada, and I was born here, but I am Tamil. A lot of my life has revolved around this identity. And today we are in May, which is Asian Heritage Month in Canada and AAPI month in the States. And I thought, you know, I really want to do a recommendation video of Asian book recs that you guys should pick up, but I have done that video before and I'll link it down below. Then I was like, you know what? I don't think I've seen many videos recommending South Asian book recs ever before. I've seen a few, but not very many. And knowing the fact that I myself, as a South Asian person, as a Desi person, have struggled to find books where I saw myself in, I really want to bring you guys a bunch of book recs that are written by South Asian authors that feature South Asian characters just doing amazing, awesome things. So for my Asian Heritage Month this month, I really wanted to highlight my heritage, which I'm really excited for. So for today's video, I'm actually really excited because I have a sponsor today for a book that is also by a South Asian author that I'm so excited to pick up. So thank you so much to Inkyard Press for sponsoring this video for the release of A Show for Two by Tashi Bhuiyan. You guys may remember this author from her previous novel, Counting Down With You, which was actually a really cute YA contemporary romance. I've recommended it to a bunch of you before, and I know a lot of you picked it up and really loved it. It's a really heartwarming teen romance that I know if I had gotten this book when I was in high school, I would have devoured it and loved it so much because I saw so much of myself in this book. A Show for Two I am even more excited for because I love the concept of the story. Basically, it follows our main character, Meena Raman. Meena has a few goals in her life. She wants to be a director, so she's determined to finally win the Golden Ivy student film competition. Aside from that, she also wants to get into her dream school across the country, and she's also super determined to leave New York City, her home, behind. But of course, something is coming to shake up Meena's world. Meena's ticket to winning the competition basically falls in her lap when an indie film star named Emmett Ramos, who's also a known heartbreaker, enrolls in her high school under a secret identity to research his next role. And so of course, Meena is determined to enlist him to help her with her competition. And so Emmett agrees to star in her short film for the competition if she'll agree to take him around New York and help him take photos for a photography contest that he's trying to win. And so as Meena and Emmett venture across the 5 boroughs of New York, her home starts to look a little bit sweeter than it did before. And with the competition deadline coming sooner, Meena has to consider whether winning will really be everything and whether she's willing to leave all of this behind. Personally, I'm so excited for this book because, as you guys may remember from previous videos where I've talked about Tashi Bhuiyan before, this book is actually based on a real life experience the author had. When she was in high school, Tom Holland, who you may know from Spider-Man, actually enrolled in her school under a secret identity to research the Spider-Man role, to be Peter Parker, the American high school kid, because as we know, he is British. So he was actually enrolled in her school, which was so cool. And she met him, and this whole book is sort of based on the experience of him having enrolled in her school. Obviously, they didn't fall in love in real life, but this book sort of extrapolates that sort of situation or that concept. And I think it just makes for a really interesting and fun concept for a book. And I'm so excited to see how Meena and Emmett fall in love. I love that we have our beautiful brown girl on the cover of this book. It just makes me feel like, you know, kids today are going to see themselves a lot better. And overall, I'm just so excited for this book. A few other things that you might want to watch out for in this book is that it's got all this city love. They go around in New York City. Meena also deals with depression, so there's mental health rep. And if you're a lover of movies and photography, you're definitely going to have a treat with this book because there are 2 characters who absolutely adore these 2 things. Overall, I'm so excited for this book, and I feel like I haven't read a heartwarming YA contemporary in a while, so I'm really excited to pick this up. If you're interested in A Show for Two and all of the adorable goodness of this, go check out the link in my description and grab a copy. Inkyard Press, thank you so much for sponsoring this video. Alrighty, with that said, now let's get into all of the books that I'm hoping to recommend today in this video. Books by South Asian authors that you can grab or pick up or read during this month or any month really. I have quite a few genres and categories to go through. I'm gonna go through all the adult book recs that I have first, and then I'll go through the YA ones because I feel like I've mentioned a lot of the YA ones before. So if you want to skip to one age category or another, you can skip to the timestamps linked down below. I'll also leave timestamps for the genres that I go through so you can check those out as well. So with that said, the first category I'm gonna go through are some literary fiction that are by Tamil authors. As you guys know, I'm Tamil Sri Lankan, so there's a few of these that are by Tamil Sri Lankan authors and then some by Tamil Indian authors. I've only read a couple of these so far, and I'm like slowly sort of uncovering the books by Tamil authors that are out there in the world, and I'm so excited by this. So I've been picking up more and more and buying more and more of them, so I'm hoping to read a lot more this year actually, and I've been getting into more literary fiction as well, so this is just overall really exciting for me, and I hope that you will pick one up as well. So I'm going to start with an author that I've actually read from before, which is S.J. Sindhu. You may recognize this author. I mentioned this book, A Marriage of a Thousand Lies, in my top 10 books of 2021. It was an honorable mention in that video. It wasn't my favorite book of the year, but I definitely saw so much of myself in this book that I loved it so much. This book basically follows a young Tamil woman who is also gay, and she and her best friend, who is also gay and is a guy, end up getting married to sort of continue with their lifestyles and, you know, their sexual orientations without their family knowing. So they sort of get into this marriage of convenience to appease their conservative parents and families and stuff, but then they continue on, you know, living their actual lives in this like fake marriage with each other. But the crux of this book sort of starts when our main character Lucky finds out that her childhood love, this other girl, is gonna get married. She's getting into an arranged marriage, and they've had an on again off again relationship for years now, and she is sort of reeling from the impact of coming to terms with the fact that her, you know, one true love is getting married. This book dealt with a lot of heavy stuff, and it's super relatable if you're Tamil or if you're South Asian in any way, if you know how South Asian communities can be around queerness and about queerness. So yeah, this was just so relatable in so many ways, and I saw so much of myself in this book. And it's funny because some of the dialogue in this book was like straight out of my mother's mouth or like auntie's mouth. So yeah, it was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. It is a difficult read though, I think, if you're someone who's gone through similar things, or if you're familiar with how difficult South Asian households can be sometimes. And then S.J. Sindhu's other book is Blue Skinned Gods, and this one we're reading for the Reading Color Book Club for May, and I'm really excited for this. This book basically follows a young boy named Kalki who is born with blue skin, and so everyone thinks that he is the 10th incarnation of the god Vishnu, and his father is like super superstitious and sets up an ashram, and people are coming to see this boy and they think that he is blessed. And at the beginning this is set in Tamil Nadu, India, but the book takes us later on to America and to the queer scene, and as Kalki sort of grows up and discovers other aspects of his life. I don't know too much about the plot about this one. It seems like there might be a magical aspect, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm really interested in this one and sort of the idea of divinity and also superstition, and I think it's going to be an interesting one to read. All right, next I have a bunch of books by a Tamil Sri Lankan author who is now residing in Canada, which is exciting because I'm also Canadian. And right now I have 3 of his books with me right now, but I know he has like 2 or 3 more. I don't know much about each of these books. I know the author himself is queer, and that some of the books feature some queer representation, but a lot of these books are either like set in Sri Lanka or like in Canada or across the two and that kind of thing, and deal with like the Tamil experience. So I'm just gonna read off the titles because I don't actually know too much about each one, but I'm hoping to read each of them and then I will give you my reviews on them later on. But first I have Cinnamon Gardens, which is set in 1920 Ceylon, and then we've got Funny Boy, which is like a queer coming of age story, and then we've got his most recent release, which I think is really interesting, which is Mansions of the Moon, and this one is set in the 6th century BC in India and follows the wife of Gautama Buddha, which I think is so interesting. I'm very excited to read this one. If anyone has read this one, let me know what you thought of it, because I feel like it seems a little bit different from some of his other books that I've read up on, because I feel like most of them are historical or contemporary literary novels, but this one is sort of taking a very far historical look. Next I have a couple books by another Tamil Sri Lankan author. I've mentioned one of his books before, but I also grabbed one of his other books as well recently. So the first one is The Story of a Brief Marriage, and this is by Arudpragasam, and this is set during Sri Lanka's civil war, and it follows a Tamil man and woman who get into an arranged marriage in the midst of all of this turmoil and are sort of trying to support each other and, you know, come to terms with this weird situation that they're in amidst all of the political upheaval and civil war going on. I feel like this is going to be a really heartbreaking one to read. It's a very short book as well, so I'm excited to pick it up. And then the other book by the same author, which I've mentioned in a few videos before, is A Passage North, and this follows a young man who is taking a train up north after he receives word that his mother's caretaker has died suddenly and mysteriously, and he's sort of taken back to the Civil War and thinking about that whole situation. It just seems like it's a literary novel. I don't know too much about the plot, but I've heard really great things about this book in particular, like really great reviews, so I'm excited to pick it up. All right, and then I grabbed a few other literary fiction, contemporary fiction books by some Indian authors, I believe. And this first one was recommended by one of my favorite authors, which is Roshni Chakshi. And this book is Gold Diggers by Sanjana Satyan. And this one seems really interesting. The back says it's a magical realist coming of age story that skewers the model minority myth to tell a hilarious and moving story about immigrant identity, community, and the underside of ambition. And from what I know, this follows a second generation teenager who has grown up in the Atlanta suburbs and is sort of dealing with the pressures of growing up in this like Asian American enclave. And I think it's going to be really interesting and sort of relatable as well. So I'm excited to read this one. This next book seems like it's going to be a really heartbreaking and difficult read, but I'm excited for it. And that is Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. It seems like it's going to be a little bit of a feminist book as well. Basically, it follows two main characters, Purnima and Savita, and the description on the back says that they have 3 strikes against them. So they are poor, ambitious, and they're girls. And in terms of the plot, I don't know too much. It seems that these two characters sort of come together in unlikely circumstances, and the story ranges from India and America and follows their lives. I also believe it involves a lot of tragedy in some form, so I would be aware of that. I feel like there's some triggers involved with this, so I'm gonna search them up before I read this, but I think it's gonna be a fantastic book, and I've also heard really amazing reviews on it. All right, so those are all the literary fiction books that I have to talk about for this video. Next, I have a couple sort of self-help or like memoir-y books that are by South Asian authors that I think are awesome. So the first one is Be a Triangle by Lily Singh. This is Lily Singh's newest book. She had a previous book called How to Be a Boss, which is how to hustle harder and how to chase your dreams, that kind of thing. But personally, I really love her new one, Be a Triangle. This is a really, really short sort of motivational book where she talks about just returning to your foundations and being a strong shape, a triangle, and keeping to this foundation when you are going through various struggles in life and finding a way to return to your foundation and to your home and to your sense of self, regardless of what's happening around you. I thought it was a pretty impactful, but also like lighthearted and positive thing to read. So definitely recommend if you're looking for something to just like pick you up. The next book was my top favorite book of 2021. There was something about it that I just related to so hard, and I absolutely love the author of this memoir, and that is You Can't Be Serious by Kal Penn. So Kal Penn is an actor. He's a South Asian actor. Some of his notable roles were in House and How I Met Your Mother, and he's also been in various other roles that I can't think of just right now. But he also worked under the Obama administration at one point during his career as well, which I think was so interesting. And so this book is his memoir, which sort of takes you through his career as an actor and also his time during the Obama administration, and then returning to acting, producing his own NBC show, and all these big moments in his career. But what I loved about this is that he grounds it in his identity and sort of the way he grew up, and you know, the difficulties he faced as being a South Asian actor trying to break into a very white Hollywood space, and how difficult it was to get roles, and how sometimes he would have to play stereotypes in order to get better roles that were really impactful. So I found it so interesting and so fascinating, and I love the way that he narrates this book as well. I highly recommend the audiobook if you're going to read this, because the way that Kal Penn talks and the jokes that he makes in the book as well come across so much better on the audio. Definitely recommend this if you're a dreamer, if you are a person who has entered a vocation or occupation or career that, you know, the aunties and uncles of the world would not be proud of or would not necessarily want you to go into to begin with. This is definitely the book to pick up. Alrighty, next I have a couple romance books that I have not read yet, but I'm excited to pick up, and these are the two that I own. I know there are more romance books by South Asian authors out there, but I have not yet like added them to my TBR kind of thing, so I don't have them to show to you today. But these are two that I'm like hoping to pick up sometime soon, so I thought I'd mention them. So the first one I have is actually the second in like a series of companion books, and that is The Singles Table by Sarah Desai. She has a whole sort of series of romances that feature South Asian main characters. I think the first one is called The Marriage Game, I want to say. This is the second one, The Singles Table, but I think each one follows a different main character. I might be making that up. I think that's what the situation is. But I thought this one was interesting because it's like an opposites attract romance, and it involves the main character setting the guy up with one of her clients. She's like a celebrity lawyer and he's a former military security specialist. And so she's basically workshopping his life and helping him find someone, and then they end up falling for each other instead. I love this concept. I love it when characters try to set each other up and then they end up falling for each other instead. I think it's so cute. So really excited to pick this one up. The next book I have is Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. This book has been popping all over TikTok, so I've been wanting to read it for a while because I know a lot of people love it. This one I don't know too much about, but basically it involves two doctors and they end up on a talk show and they argue over something and it goes like viral basically. And then we have our main girl character, Karina, whose father is trying to sell her late mother's home. So Karina makes a deal with her father that if she can get engaged within 4 months, he can't sell the house and he has to give it to her instead. So she's determined to sort of find a guy who's willing to get engaged with her in 4 months. And this is where Prem, our main male character, comes in. He sort of gets contacted by Karina's aunties who are meddlesome AF, and they propose a idea to Prem that they will invest in his like clinic that he wants for the community if he will woo Karina and get her to fall for him and basically get engaged with her. And so it becomes this like arranged situation slash like, you know, forced marriage type situation, but they're also both lying to each other. And I think it's going to be a fantastic time. I know a lot of people love this one, so I'm excited to pick it up. All right, next I have a couple books in the same series that are historical fictions. And I read these books way long ago, back when I was in high school, I think, but they're set during the Mughal Empire of India, which I think is the most fascinating historical period ever. So those books are The 20th Wife and The Feast of Roses by Indu Sundaresan. These books were honestly so enchanting when I first read them in high school. It follows one of the most controversial empresses during the Mughal Empire, and it sort of tells her story from when she's a child, I think, until she's much older. A lot of the court intrigue, how she falls in love with one of the princes, and then like, you know, the politics of all the other wives and, you know, children and stuff going on in court, and how she rises to power and all of that. And I think it was so cool, and it's one of those really like empowering stories of these women who make the most out of nothing but then are sometimes vilified for that. So loved it overall. I know there's a third book in the series as well, which I've never read, but I'm hoping to reread these sometime soon because I really did love them back then, but I'm hoping they stand up to the test of time. All right, next I have 3 fantasies by the same author, and that is Tasha Suri. I've talked about Tasha Suri's books quite a few times before, specifically Empire of Sand, which is the Read and Color book club pick for April. And then I've also talked about The Jasmine Throne before, which is her sapphic romance fantasy that features 2 girl characters who fall in love. One's a princess, one's a maid. On the flip side, Empire of Sand is based off of the Mughal Empire period of Indian history as well, and involves a little bit of magic and a specific race of people called the Amrithi, who are outcasts. And then her other book is Realm of Ash, and this one I believe is a companion to Empire of Sand, but I don't actually know too much about this one, but I've heard great things about it. So yeah, all 3 of these are just like great sort of South Asian fantasies, like set in South Asian inspired worlds and follow South Asian main characters. I will say these are on the slower side to begin with, but I do think they have the payoff by the end. Alrighty, and then the last fantasy book that I have to recommend is my all-time favorite book ever. I've talked about this so many times. You guys are probably tired of me saying this, but that book is Kaigei by Vaishnavi Patel. Literally my favorite book that I've read this year and also just like ever. It hits so many marks for me personally. It has fantasy, it has like an empowering narrative of a woman, it's a feminist retelling, and overall it's just so fantastic, and personally I just loved it, related to it hard, and just found it to be such a fascinating and empowering story. Basically this book is a feminist retelling of the Ramayana, following the life of a vilified queen from the epic named Kaigei. And so we are following Kaigei's life from when she's a child until much later in her life during the events of the Ramayana, and we are sort of getting her perspective of the story and sort of how her entire life has informed the decisions that she makes during the timeline of the Ramayana. This book also sort of paints some of the evil characters from the epic in a better light and some of the good characters in the epic in a bad light, which I found so fascinating, and it was such an interesting take on the epic. This book also delves into so many different themes, including motherhood and the danger of unchecked patriarchy, and it's also very much a feminist book. It is a book of a woman sort of helping other women and trying her best to uplift other women, which I found so amazing. The main character of this book is also asexual, which is some really nice representation. And I think one of my favorite things about this book is Kaigei herself and how compassionate she was and resilient she was, and how much she cared for the people around her, and how she was just really trying her best and trying to be actually quite selfless in all the decisions that she makes. If you're a fantasy fan, this one also has quite a bit of magic in it. Peggy herself has some magical powers in this book, but there's also the added aspect of all of the stuff from the epic, so like the demons and the monsters and the chariot riding and all this other stuff. And overall, it just makes for like a really interesting and fun read. So if you're into like feminist retellings, if you're a fan of Madeline Miller's Circe, this is definitely a book to pick up. Alrighty, so those are all of the adult South Asian book recs I want to make. Now let's get into the YA book recs that I have by South Asian authors. So I'm gonna go through some contemporaries and then I'll go through some fantasies. Alrighty, so the first book that I have is one that I haven't read yet, but it's a new release that I'm really excited to pick up, and that is Debating Darcy by Satyana Dasgupta. And this one is a reimagining of Pride and Prejudice during our modern day in an American high school, and follows two South Asian main characters. One is a lifelong speech competitor and one is like heavily involved in debate, and the two of them end up in this like sort of hate to love, enemies to lovers, Pride and Prejudice-esque relationship situation going on that I am super excited for, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, so excited to pick this one up. Alright, next I have 4 different books by the same author who wrote a bunch of like really awesome YA contemporaries featuring South Asian main characters, main girls. And what I love about these books is that one, they're really fun and cute and funny and just adorable and like have the cutest little love stories. The other thing I love about each of these books is that the main character, our main brown girl, is on the cover of the book for each book. So the first 4 books was When Dipple Met Rishi, which involves 2 kids who go to like an app development camp and are sort of getting like set up by their parents in like sort of an arranged marriage type thing and end up falling for each other at the camp. The next one is From Twinkle with Love, and this one follows a main character who wants to be a filmmaker and a director, and the book is told through these like letters that she writes to her favorite female South Asian filmmakers. And this one also involves a romance and a element of a secret admirer as well. The next one is There's Something About Sweetie, which is my personal fave of all 4 books. And this one follows our unapologetic main character, Sweetie, who has been told that she, you know, can't have fun, can't be who she is just because she's fat. And she is sort of determined to prove everyone wrong and starts stepping out of her shell. And this is where our other main character, Ashish, comes in, who has been having a rough time with things and has gotten into quite a bit of trouble with his parents. And so what his parents and Sweetie's parents end up doing is setting them up and getting them to go on like contracted dates where they go to like very Indian things, so like to the temple and like to visit a grandparent or something, and the 2 of them are sort of falling for each other over this situation. And then the last book by Sandhya Menon is 10 Things I Hate About Pinky, and this one is the one that I have not read, but basically from what I know, it follows our main character Pinky, who is a very like social justice, social activist type character, and the romance in this one is a bit of like a hate to love, enemies to lovers type thing, I believe. It's a very like unconventional pairing of characters. Alrighty, the next book is one of my all-time favorites, and that is All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. Sabaa Tahir is one of my favorite authors, but this was her first ever contemporary novel, and this was just so freaking fantastic. Sabaa Tahir herself is Pakistani American, and the main characters in this book are also Pakistani American. This is a book that is like very harrowing and deals with a lot of heavy subject matter, but at the center of the story, it is following these 2 Pakistani American teens who are just dealing with a lot of stuff and difficult family situations, and there's discussions of like addiction and race and the legal system at one point as well, and it's also a bit of a star-crossed love story, I would say. One thing I really loved about this book is also that it's a bit of a generational story. There are parts of this book that are told from the perspective of the mother of one of the characters, and her story when she was younger back in Pakistan sort of intertwines with the current day story of these 2 teens and affects their current day as well. This is a gorgeous, heartbreaking book that will leave you in tears by the end, but I also just found it really relatable and just so compelling. So definitely like God tier, one of my favorite books ever. Alrighty, if you're looking for some queer South Asian YA contemporaries, then look no further than Adiba Jaigirdar. So she has a couple sapphic romances. So the first is the Henna Wars. This one follows our Irish Bangladeshi main character who has recently just come out to her parents and is dealing with that aftermath, but she's also falling for one of her fellow classmates. And there's this whole element of their school doing like a business competition, and the main character is setting up this henna business, but then a competing group also sets up a henna business, but none of them are South Asian. And so there's this idea of like the whole cultural appropriation that is discussed in the book as well. And then Adiba Jagirdar's other book, Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating. This one is probably my favorite of her books and is just so cute. This one also features a sapphic romance, and as you can probably tell from the title, it involves a fake dating romance, which was just so cute and I loved so much. I absolutely hated some of the side characters in this book that like made this fake dating situation have to happen, but I loved our main characters, Honey and Issue. They were so adorable and had their own things that they were going through, but they were also super cute together. All right, next I have a couple books also by a Bangladeshi author, and that features some queer sapphic relationships. For both of these books, the relationships themselves are not really the crux of the story, but rather the things that the main character is dealing with. So in one of the books, Zara Hossein is here, and this is by Sabina Khan. This one deals a lot more with like the racism aspect and sort of what the main character is dealing with day to day in school and what her family is facing as well. The character in these books are also Muslim, and so there's that added aspect as well. And then her other book, The Love and Lies of Roxana Ali, is probably my favorite and one of my favorite YA contemporaries ever. This one really delves into the queer POC experience and sort of what happens when, you know, you come from a very conservative background or from a family that really doesn't approve of queerness. And so this follows our main character, Roxana Ali, who is gay. And when her parents find out that she is gay and sort of sees her kissing her girlfriend, they totally freak out and basically take her back to Bangladesh under the pretense of like visiting her ailing grandmother, but instead they're trying to set her up in an arranged marriage and sort of also pray the gay away. There are some very difficult things that happen in this book, but I think the overall message of it was really amazing. And I think what's fascinating about this book is that despite her very bigoted parents at times, Roxana starts to realize that the other people in her life and in her family are not necessarily as conservative and not necessarily as homophobic as some of the other people in her life. Just by growing up in a specific sort of environment or conservative atmosphere, not everyone ends up with the same values always. Alrighty, now we're on to some YA fantasies by South Asian authors. I've got quite a few favorites in this category and also some books that I've never read before, so we're gonna just dive in. So first I've got a couple books that I have started and never got around to finishing, but I'm hoping to finish one day. So first I have Hunted by the Sky by Tanes Bathena. This one is a really interesting fantasy. I don't remember too much about the plot of it, but it is set in a fantasy world inspired by medieval India and involves various magic systems and follows a main character who is sort of abandoned by her family and finds a tribe of women who share the same sort of magic as her. There's also like a mystery going on in this one and mistaken identities and a romance as well. From what I remember of like the very beginning of this book, I did really enjoy it. I just never got around to finishing the rest, but I do want to pick it up later on. All right, and then this next book is like the most interesting concept I've ever heard. I did start this one, but I never got around to finishing it, so I'm hoping to pick it up at some point, and that is Star Daughter by Shweta Thakrar. This is, I believe, a standalone fantasy, but I think it has like a companion that's coming out. It basically follows her main character, Sheetal, who is part star, part human, so her mother is like literally a star and lives among these like celestial beings. And so the inciting incident of the book is when Sheetal is sort of taken up to this celestial plane and meets her mother again and is trying to find a way to, I think, heal her ailing father. Alrighty, next I have a fantasy series by an author I mentioned previously, so that was Sabaa Tahir, and the series is one of my all-time favorites ever, and that is the Ember Quartet. So the first book is An Ember in the Ashes, and there are 3 more books after that. This series is so freaking awesome, and what I love about it is that despite being in a fantasy world that is like completely made up, the main character is South Asian, as you can see from the beautiful cover of our brown girl on the front of the book. And this series is basically like Game of Thrones meets like Roman Empire meets like teenagers just fighting for their lives, and I absolutely love it so much. I think the characters of this series are super resilient and just so endearing, and you really want to root for them. But the series can get super cutthroat, lots of people dying, lots of betrayals, some really complex and interesting villains, and overall just a really epic saga that spans multiple cultures and like takes the characters on crazy journeys. And overall, I just really love it as a series and like as a fantasy series, so highly recommend if you're looking for a fantasy. Alrighty, next I have a bunch of books by the same author who I absolutely adore, and that is Roshni Chokshi. So I have her first book, which is The Star-Touched Queen, and this is basically a retelling of the Hades and Persephone myth from Greek mythology, but in a sort of South Asian inspired fantasy world. And obviously our main characters are also brown, they're South Asian. Asian, and I absolutely love this book. It is very, very enchanting, such a beautiful little love story as well. And I personally really loved our main character, Maya, for how resilient she is, but also like how much of a go-getter she is. And I just love like some of the side characters as well. There's like a flesh-eating horse in this book who is just literally so awesome. She obviously talks in the book, which is why I love her, and she's just so awesome. So if you're gonna read it for anything, read it for the flesh-eating horse. And then the companion to A Star-Touched Queen features a couple characters that are like briefly mentioned in The Star-Touched Queen, and they end up being the main characters in the companion novel, which is A Crown of Wishes. This book is a really interesting situation. It is set in a Indian-inspired fantasy world, follows two main characters, Gauri and Vikram, and they're from two opposing like countries or kingdoms, and both of them get the opportunity to compete in something called the Tournament of Wishes. And so it's set in this like magical realm. There's gods involved and magical creatures and lots of beings from Hindu mythology, and basically this Tournament of Wishes will grant a wish to the victor, and both of them have reasons for entering this competition and reasons to win, but obviously they're also gonna fall in love, so it made for a really interesting story, and I really actually loved how magical this book was. Alrighty, and the final book that I have by Roshni Chokshi, or series that I have by her, is the Gilded Wolves series, and this is one of my all-time favorite series ever. This is less focused on like just her South Asian identity, but still has a main character who is South Asian. She's Indian, and that's Laila, who is one of my favorite characters ever. But this is a series that follows 5 to 6 different main characters sort of pulling off a heist, at least in this first book, during the 1800s in Paris. This series is based on a magic system called forging, where you can imbue certain objects with magical power, and this whole magic system is sort of tied up in themes of colonialism as well, so it made for a really interesting series. And I absolutely love all the characters in the series as well. They're all so layered and vivid and just come to life off the page, and Laila is definitely a star to look out for. So if you're looking for a like ensemble cast with a South Asian main character in it, definitely want to pick up. Alrighty, and with that said, that is the final book on this huge book recommendations video of books by South Asian authors. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you found a new book to pick up, whether you're South Asian or not, whether you're looking for something to see yourself in, or you're just looking for, you know, a new book to expand your horizons. Whatever it is, I really hope you'll pick up one of these books and let me know what you think of it. I am so excited to pick up a lot of the ones that I haven't read yet, and I'm hoping that a lot of you will pick up the ones that I love. As always, thank you so much for watching, and definitely let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And thank you so much again to Inkyard Press for sponsoring this video for the release of A Show for Two by Tashi Bhuyan. I'm so excited for this YA contemporary romance, and you guys should definitely go check it out using the link in my description. That's all I have today, so go check out my Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and TikTok in the description down below, and I'll see you guys in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!